Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gail Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. I'm in a pretty frantic mode. I am prepping for a week-long virtual conference that I'm hosting next week, and I admit I kind of got to it a little late. But now a whole bunch of speakers have confirmed. It is an absolutely amazing lineup, and I just have to go publicize it, prep the presentation slides, get all the speaker bios on the site, get the sponsors to pay up, set up all the Zoom sessions, make sure the attendees get the right info, and otherwise go through the same craziness when I conducted this last year. Except in 2020, it was 6 business days over 2 weeks with like 12 sessions because my Thursdays were taken up by the giant FDA industry negotiation I was involved in. On the plus side, I had never really administered one of these things before that first session in 2020. This time, it should be easier to do 2 or 3 webinars a day for 1 week. But what I'm saying is, next week's intro might be a little bit curt. Anyway, otherwise, things are going fine. This weekend, if all goes well, I will surpass last year's running mileage, which, not important to you, but to me, it is something I did not think was going to happen, given the various injuries I had and the big psychological hit mid-year with the leukemia diagnosis, which is still going just fine, no major issues, etc. Well, it's funny when I look at the Garmin GPS watch thing that I use, more than half of my miles will have come for the year, will have come from September through December, which is only 1/3 of the year. It's sound weird, but it is no stretch to say that just joining my running group 3 or 4 times a week has been a real boon for me, mentally as well as physically. We gab while we run, but I never feel like I have to talk about my life or try to do the sort of conversational thing that I do during the podcasts. Even though I know, the guys would be there if I ever needed them. It isn't the sort of thing where I have to be that Gil. What I mean is the core group, it's 2 guys who are 70 and 71. They don't know what a podcast is really. So I don't talk much about that part of my life, and all I tell them is I won't be here for Saturday's long run because I have to interview somebody. So it's good to be able to compartmentalize is what I'm saying. Just having a part of my life that's productive, but doesn't involve, the same set of personae that I'm accustomed to. I don't know. I'm prattling. I just want to note this morning, despite all that, one of them gave me, when we finished up, Haruki Murakami's memoir, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, which I've always wanted to read, but had never picked up. And lest I think he went out of his way and got it for me as a gift, he assured me that someone had given it to him a year or 2 ago. He never read it, figured I might want to because you have books. So that's where we are. Anyway, speaking of compartmentalizing, this week's guest has had to do that for a long time. Sophia Glock. She has a new YA graphic memoir out called Passport. And it's ostensibly, or at least it leads you into her adolescence in an unnamed Central American city. And her parents have not quite defined jobs, and through all the cities where Sophia grew up, and she moved around a lot, there were security measures around her that would seem extensive to an outside observer. What she accidentally learns, and this is real life, this is her memoir, it is not a spoiler since it's mentioned in the book's marketing and flap copy and all this stuff, is that her parents are intelligence officers. And from the moment she learns that, her own teenage secrets are sort of mirrored against the fact that her parents have been keeping this giant secret from her all her life. And it makes an underlying tension throughout the book, even though it's not the sole focus of Sophia's story. She doesn't spend the whole time, contemplating her parents and all. More, it's the background for this deep dive into a girl's teenage years and that inevitable rebellion and need for independence and sexual awakening and the social cliques. And in this case, the loneliness of struggling with the local language and a different culture. And that assumption that the family is going to move on to another country at some point. So even without the spy thing, or intelligence officer thing, it is a really compelling and subtle story about being a teenage girl. And it's well paced. It's beautifully drawn in this style. And she'll talk about some of the techniques that go into it, but the style that kind of evokes the tenuousness of memory and what we cling to. And it's just gorgeous to look at with this sort of storyteller's eye for what needs to be in each panel. As I mentioned in the episode, I am so not the target audience for this book, at least ostensibly, but I found it utterly captivating. So go check out Passport. It's from Little Brown Books for Young Readers. It's listed as being for 12 plus. I don't have kids. To me, that seems pretty appropriate for the story. I'm not sure my niece, who's a little bit under that age, it would be good for her. But Passport, it is a wonderful read. And I've known Sophia for a bunch of years, but all of our conversations pretty much have been mediated by a table, because it's always at a comics festival and she's on one side of the table and I'm making the rounds on the other one. So it was really lovely to just have a long conversation with her at last, even though it was remote this time. I'm hoping we'll get together in person away from a festival table in future. Now here's Sophia's bio. Sophia Glock is a cartoonist who currently lives and mislays her pencils in Austin, Texas. Her graphic memoir, Passport, is out now from Little Brown Young Readers. She attended the College of William and Mary and received her MFA from the School of Visual Arts in 2008. Sophia's comics and cartoons have been published in The New Yorker, BuzzFeed, Narratively, Mother Magazine, and Time Out New York. Her work has also been featured in various anthologies, including Ink Brick, Suspect Device, Quarter Moon, Digestate, Rabid Rabbit, and Kilgore Quarterly. Her collection of comics, Born, Not Raised, was selected to be included in the Society of Illustrators Cartoon and Comics Art Annual 2016, and her short comic, The Secrets in My Mother's Nightstand, was shortlisted for the Cartoonist Studio Prize for Best Webcomic of the Year in 2016. In 2008, she was a recipient of a Xeric Foundation grant for her comic, The Deformatory. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Sophia Glock. When did you decide you were ready to tell the story of Passport?
It was a process. I always hesitate to say this because it sounds like I don't want to, of course I'm my own captain of my own artistic ship, but my now husband has been encouraging me for many, many years to write this story. And I always was simply I could never, it's the secret. It is the family secret. I would never get permission. They would never play along. It would be too difficult. It would be too painful. But I began to listen to him a little bit more and more. And then it just became a question of how do you write a memoir? And this is memoir. It's not autobio. And I had a lot of wonderful, examples of autobio in comics, but I was like, oh, I'm not that, and it took me a really long time to sort the differences out about how I was going to approach this.
Did you have prose examples too, besides comics? Or were you looking primarily as comics for templates and understanding that?
I was looking at comics. I really was, because, I've read prose memoir and that's not entirely true. I did look to some prose memoir as well, in terms of how do you sort out the messy nature of truth telling, and there a few things happened. I had the implicit encouragement of my sort of immediate family, which was my husband, and I read Arab of the Future, which really, really helped because it's and I don't know if you've read it yet, Gil, but you have.
I've only done the first volume. I have I think volumes 2 and 3 at home. Peter Cooper turned me on to it a bunch of years ago, and I should read the next couple of these too. But
yeah. I mean, I related to it. I'm obviously not, do not have the same.
Actually, I won't even say if you were in Libya or not, but
I think I'm allowed to say I was definitely not.
Good.
But that was hugely impactful to me to see somebody talk about a very specific experience in childhood and do it in a very detailed way and do it from the point of view of a child. And that really helped me see that I could develop this voice. So I started writing and I wrote a short comic called Nightstand, which was just 7 pages, but it was the way in for me because once I wrote this comic, I kind of could hear my adolescent voice, and it was imperative that I sort of sort out the character of Sophia versus me, Sophia, just so I could get over the self-consciousness of writing about my life. And then I just sort of realized that I was going to have to ask for forgiveness before I could get their permission. And I wrote it first and then showed them sort of an early version and let them know that I was doing this. And then
them being family, right?
Sorry. Yes. Them being my mother and father.
Okay.
And, because that was the biggest psychological sort of block for me. It was first, how do I write memoir? How do I write about myself? How do I tell the secret respectfully? And then what do I do with the actual real life repercussions of involving family in a story that I want to publish?
Was it tougher getting approval from your family or from the CIA?
Definitely much tougher getting approval from the CIA.
Okay.
My parents were surprisingly supportive. I think they were actually deeply gratified that somebody would be able to tell. Nothing, of course, truly secret is divulged. That would not have ever been allowed.
No.
But I think they were gratified that somebody could express the nature of this lifestyle in a way that they never would be able to.
And telling it as a YA story? So
that was my agent's suggestion, and I think she was entirely correct. My original conception of this was a story about small children for adults, and I don't really actually think there is a market there. And if there is, it's very slim. I do ultimately write for myself. I draw for myself. I draw for my own pleasure, my own interest, but I also don't write in a vacuum. I need readers. Once I began to realize the real emotional crux of my own story was in adolescence, when I discovered the quote unquote truth about the nature of my parents' work, I realized that that's actually where all the interesting stuff happened. And I sort of sloughed off the early chapters where I was just kind of just innocently moving through the world, thinking that everybody lived this way. I'm not like, there was a point in my life where I thought this was not just normal, but common. But she pointed out that there is a shelf for YA memoirs. There was a place on the shelf. There's a place where a bookseller can place it. And it was going to be a lot easier to get my book into the hands of people who are interested if I organized it along a specific audience. And so I did. And it really came together much more coherently than I thought it would. But I've been super happy with my transition into focusing on a specific audience.
Now, I don't have much experience with books for that audience, but what did you learn about what's appropriate and what's, I don't want to say permitted, but what's good for that audience versus we can't actually include X, Y, or Z. Not including all the book burning stuff we have going on right now and all the censorship issues.
What I learned was that you can actually talk about a lot of stuff. And, I did do my deep dive into YA booklet, graphic novel YA specifically. And I was like, oh, right, I can actually talk about anything. I can talk about death. I can talk about sex. I can talk about drugs. I can talk about all of the dirty and weird stuff around being human, around being an adolescent. It matters how you show it, though. What can happen? Some stuff can happen off stage. You don't ever want to get too explicit. You want to sort of give it to the reader in a way that they can appropriately digest it. And the real thing I learned about YA, though, is it's actually not an age group. YA is a tone. And that was really freeing, because the truth is that, I don't know if you've read, for example, This One Summer. Truly, I've
always been told to, and I never have, and I feel like a goddamn heel about not reading it so far.
Oh, you're not a heel. You're lucky because you get to read it for the first time, and I'm jealous of you. It's lovely. And mind-blowing, and it's a great example of YA that is not limited to the young adult experience, but it captures the YA tone in a perfect way.
Did you get advice from other YA cartoonists when you were working on it?
No.
Or was there work enough to kind of give you an idea of how to work it?
The advice was simply lifted from the pages of
Gotcha.
Good YA.
And that's the best way. Usually an artist isn't going to have an explicit set of rules with this is how you have to do this versus the
I didn't have any explicit connections in the YA world when I started this, because my background is totally indie circuit, all of us weirdos making funny zines, I wasn't really plugged into this before I began it.
I was rereading the Lettuce Girl comics that I bought from you over all those years at the various festivals before this. So I will talk about pandemic-y stuff and how much we miss just tabling and talking to people at festivals, but that's a separate thing. But for now, one of the questions I always have for memoir writers, regardless of the audience or prose and comics, how difficult is it not to intrude with the what I know now voice? Keeping that sense of who you were in that moment for the audience. It's
very difficult. Like that's probably, because I didn't want it to be infused with adult Sophia's point of view. I had to sort of get back to that mentality of, now, of course, you can never totally remove your current self. Your ability to look back on your life is part of the process. But there were little tricks that I used to get back into that state of mind. I literally listened to the terrible music I listened to back then. Wallflowers Bringing Down the Horse on repeat.
Which I will say, it once was on a drive I had from New Jersey down to Delaware for a press event. One headlight play every single goddamn station I changed to. The entire drive down there was playing one headlight.
You rode that wave all the way.
Can't escape it. 2.5 hours. This is just going to keep going and going. So. But reacclimated yourself to that. I read the diaries. I'm so grateful that I kept diaries. My mother always, from when we were little, was like, keep a diary. And I certainly did. And so that really helped get back to that mentality.
But yeah, it's a challenge because obviously what you write is informed by what you know now, but you don't want to do it like an omnipotent sort of, and this is what I was learning, because that's not
Yeah.
interesting.
Had I only known. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What did it teach you about storytelling, about cartooning, and ultimately, what did you learn about yourself in the process of Passport? Which is a huge tripartite question, but I figure we got times.
Yeah, I'm happy to go for it. I'll start with storytelling first. I think when I started writing it, I found myself falling into the same trap again and again and again, which was creating a catalog of grievances, as I called it, where
God, yeah. I'm sorry. Personal essays, invariably, I devolve into that. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, but it's so tempting. And this is how I was disserviced, and this is how I was misunderstood, and this is every person who said anything wrong to me, and this is how I was humiliated, and that is very boring. It's incredibly indulgent, and memoir's already indulgent, so you really, really, really gotta watch it. So it was really difficult I had to make sure I wasn't falling into that trap. And whenever the thing began to feel monotonal, I realized it was because I was listing the ways that I'd been failed as an adolescent. But of course, I wasn't failed as an adolescent. I was embarrassed. I was sad. All sorts of weird things happened to me, and all sorts of fantastic things happened to me. And so I found that the best way to keep from doing that was to realize that those everyday humiliations that we went through in high school and with our families were committed by other human beings with their own humiliations, with their own pain. And I had to remember that the people I was talking about were humans with their own stories, with who also contained within them 18 different memoirs. And so I discovered how important compassion is. And I became a lot more, it really softened me towards a lot of people that I ended up writing about, including members of my family and including just, old friends.
Plus, and I know this is sort of in the zero-sum way of looking at it, if you do slight them in your memoir, there's always the possibility they can get back at you in theirs.
They would be free to.
Yeah, that's I once dated a singer-songwriter in my single days, and I was just happy she left the industry before I showed up in any of her music. But, that's neither here nor there, I guess. But yeah, in terms of learning, how to tell a story differently than how you were doing it previously, did this really, change things for you in terms of how you see either comics or your ability to tell long form work?
I guess the biggest thing I learned in terms of comic book writing was how to, size up, because, for example, you brought up The Lettuce Girl, and if you take all 4 volumes of The Lettuce Girl, it comes up to be around 200 pages. So, that's 200-page book technically, right? But I wrote each of those in like 70, chunks, 70-page chunks or 50-page chunks. So I never actually had to balance 300 plus pages before, and it's unwieldy. So I had to learn how to do that. And I think the big thing I learned was that, like, when you get this long, a lot of it's just, a lot of pages are just doing their work. Not every page can be clever. Not every page is going to have a nifty bit of visual storytelling. Like, some of it is just
it's a continuity
a work-a-day page. Yes. Yeah.
It's funny because it puts me in mind of Pete Bagg's biographies of recent years, where every single one of them is a self-contained page. And it only occurred to me partway through the first one. I'm like, hey, wait a second. He's creating basically a setup and a payoff for 120 pages straight, which is
amazing.
Might be why it took him quite so long to get some of these done, as opposed to, letting the pages breathe and like you say, do the work.
Yeah. Well, there's a balance, right? I mean, do you really want to get into the formal nitty-gritty? Yeah, great. Okay. So in theory, yes. I mean, you're right. What he does is, and I'd never really thought about it like that, but you're right that each page is practically a tiny masterpiece, right? But on one hand, you do. I mean, I think I've heard you discuss this on the podcast before, but I think there have been some divergent opinions about what I'm going to regarding what I'm going to say. Yeah. But I do think every page should contain itself. I also believe every row should contain itself, and I also think every panel should contain itself. Now that's a lot, and hopefully a lot of that just happens automatically, but no one of those things should feel bad on its own. They should all be balanced within themselves and together. Now, balance doesn't necessarily mean complete, though, in a sense, right? You still want the reader to turn the page. You still want flow to happen, and you don't want them to be hyper aware of your craft. You want them to just be in it. But so for me, it's a bit of a balancing act. Like I said, not every page could be the cleverest page in the world. Sometimes we just needed to get through to the next part. But in general, my personal ideal, and I'm not saying that I achieve this, but yes, every panel should be complete, every row, every page, and every spread, of course.
How much editing gets done after drawing?
Oh, nothing. I mean,
that's what I've always wondered, like whether it's one of those, you really need another panel in here, and the cartoonist just melts the heck down, and yeah.
No. I mean, there's some like, oh dear, that's just ugly. Could you please fix that? Or the word bubble looks like it's coming out of the dog, things like that. So I guess technically some editing, maybe some dialogue editing, but actual comic writing editing. I've messed up if that's the case, because it really should be tight, finish. The writing is actually done by the time I start drawing. There's no more writing left. It's just execution. It's just craft after that point.
And is that your standard process?
Yes.
Okay.
I do a lot of free form writing at the top, which I eventually try and sort of make as cohesive as possible until I get frustrated and just say, I'm ready to draw now. And then I do rounds and rounds of thumbnails until kind of everything is decided. And then there's still some editing that happens when I'm penciling, where it's still flexible, where it's still plastic. But once pencils are finished, the writing is over.
And where'd comics really start for you? As a reader, as a maker. I mean, I've seen some of your past interviews about this, but I figure we should have that conversation. So.
Yeah. I, like any good red-blooded American, read the funnies. Like any human, honestly. We're all being assaulted by comics constantly. We're all comics readers, whether we want to admit to it or not. But for me, they came into focus when I was 12 years old. I was obsessed with the X-Men cartoon on Fox. It meant everything to me. It made me feel feelings. And then I was, I think, in a thrift store or like a rummage sale thing, and I found an X-Men comic. It was technically a Rogue miniseries comic. And I was like, oh, right, there are comics about these characters I'm obsessed with. And then it was just over. I was obsessed. I wanted to spend all my money on it. My parents were incredibly upset with my new hobby. And I literally a month after the discovery of X-Men comics, I came to them very seriously. And I said, this is it. This is what I want to do with my life. And yeah, I mean that's my quote unquote origin story.
Yeah, and you can get a hit with radiation or anything weird like that, so that's good. Yeah.
No, but I
Magic ring.
wasn't. I
Oh,
thought about it. I honestly thought about it. I was like, I'm just about to hit like 13. You never know. You
you know
never know.
my horrible joke about this, right? That my mutant power showed up this year at 50, and boy, it really sucks. Making a lot of shitty leukocytes, not the superpower I was expecting as an X-Men fan when I was a kid. That's
Yeah,
really
no, a little bit, a day late and
not
a dollar
cool.
short, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's not
Of
the
all,
one we
yeah,
want.
of all ironies, that was my comic too. I was just, ancient and decrepit, so older than you, but it was the Claremont and Byrne X-Men for me when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. That was the formative comic. So yeah, that the ones that led in, about 10, 15 years before you discovered them, it was,
I mean,
that.
you came in at the right time. I mean, you
Oh,
came
no
in with the
shit.
good
I was
stuff.
buying the Days of Future Past when it came out on the newsstand. So that was pretty much as good as it was going to get. And after that, you just stick
Yeah.
around for a while, but eventually move out of superheroes. So what was your move out of the superhero genre?
I was very obsessed with it as a medium, and I started writing research. This is very, very nerdy, and I actually reference it in Passport. But I began writing research papers about comics in high school, in like these sort of like long research papers, of like defending them as literature, right?
I did one in college on V for Vendetta back in
Oh,
like
nice. Yeah.
1991 and 92. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It was
bird of a
very
feather.
fun.
Yeah.
And in that, I discovered, oh my gosh, I'm going to blank on her name. Oh, no, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Um,
Female comics writer.
yes, Gail Simone's.
I was
I
just about to say
discovered,
Gail Simone.
yeah.
That's like the first one I was going to jump to mind from that era. So, yeah.
I discovered Gail Simone's Women in Refrigerators. And that just blew my mind. And it really changed my point of view about what I was reading. My senior thesis was misogyny in comics. And I still loved them, but I wasn't, they weren't really for me. I wanted something more. And then I discovered, I was reading The New Yorker like one does at 16. And
Nerd.
I know, and I discovered Chris Ware. They had an excerpt of Jimmy Corrigan, and my mind just, it broke open again, and it melted all over, my shoulders. I couldn't like think about anything else except writing comics like that.
And then the process of becoming an actual cartoonist as opposed to a
Oh,
theoretical.
very messy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't have art classes at my high school. My parents were supportive of me making imagery, and they would give me like, you know, lessons with like painters who were trying to make, cash on a Saturday morning. And then I went to a very classic liberal arts college, which was a beautiful school. But, I learned printmaking and oil painting, which were all wonderful, delicious skills. But no, I didn't know how to do it. I would buy books. I bought the DC Guide to Comic Book Writing. And, it's not a bad book, but it didn't teach me how to write comics at all. Like I couldn't figure it out. And I'm literally copying, images of, pictures of Rogue that I find in Wizard magazine and thinking this is going to get me there. And I was very confused even at this point still between the difference between comic art and comic writing.
Mhm.
I honestly considered, I was like, do I have to go to Joe Kubert's school of,
Yeah.
do I have, is that the only way? Because what else was I going to do? Ultimately, I don't even think they would have served the thing that I wanted, nor would I even have the skill set to thrive in a school like that, even though I think it's very cool that it exists. So I just kind of made these weird, flat, short comics that I've never shown anybody for a long time until I decided that I had to go to grad school in order to take this seriously. In retrospect, it's kind of weird that I was had that much conviction. I don't know if I would.
I would have gone with I need to go to grad school to dump enough debt on me to talk me out of doing comics. But yeah, I get where you're coming from.
Right. I really wandered into a pile of debt. But at least I went to a good school. I went to SVA, illustration as visual essay, because it was one of the only programs that seemed to support comics. And that, that was a mixed experience in that I did not thrive my first year. I was not doing well. I don't know if it was obvious to my professors as much as I felt it, But my second year, what the school does, what the graduate program does, and I think it's a wonderful model. They assign each student with a personal thesis advisor working in that field. That person is compensated, but they become basically your private professor. And what I really enjoyed about it was the practicality of it. And my thesis advisor was the cartoonist David Heatley, who is nothing short of an expressionistic genius. Yeah. And he taught me how to do it. He was like, this is how you do it. You obviously have the ideas. You're obviously trying very hard. And he was like, he gave me the bricks and mortar of actually
how to make comics.
Yeah. From, all of it, the physical building part and just the insight into how to write. His voice is in my head for all time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How much did your parents' secret lives weigh on you in your adult life?
I'm not sure if weigh on me would be the right term per se.
In terms of having something you either couldn't or didn't want to, something that you were holding back from people in your life. I guess that's what I'm getting at. What did how did that affect you, do you think?
It's affected me in the way that I'm actually an extrovert. I'm actually an oversharer. I'm not very, I think I have a healthy degree of privacy, but it has been frustrating over the years to not be able to answer people's questions straight. I was much more comfortable with it when I was younger because I felt like we were all part of something together. And the older I got, the more frustrated I became because it sort of receded into the past, and people would still ask me questions like, well, why were you overseas? Why weren't you raised in the States? Because it inevitably comes up. I don't have the same reference points that other Americans I meet have, or I'll have a bizarre story about living in a certain country and having a certain experience, or a funny cultural exchange, a funny cultural exchange. And, and if I want to share these things, then I have to share this other big part of my life, which was that I was not raised in this country. And it's very interesting. People are generally interested in it. And some people don't care and move on immediately. But some people are interested enough to be like, why? And well, what did they do? And the older I got, the more uncomfortable I became feigning disinterest in their lives, because that's what I had to do.
Yeah, I would have just gone, oh, they worked for the State Department and just kind of let it drift. But
but the older I got, the more informed my friends became. What did he do? Well, what did he do at XYZ, place that you just told me? What did he do there? And I'd have to say, oh gosh, I just don't care about anything.
The flip is what you should go with. I could tell you how to go back and relive your life. Be completely honest and just laugh about it, and everybody will think you're joking. I've gotten away with my entire career by doing this,
Right,
by
right.
my imposter syndrome and everything. I
Right.
literally tell people, oh, I'm completely unqualified for everything. I have no background in X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
They all laugh, and I tell them that's how I keep getting away with it. And they keep laughing. So anyway,
yeah. Lean in. Well, I had to do that a lot too, because inevitably anybody else who was, some people are informed enough. They're like, I hear that that's what people just say when they're actually CIA. And then I'd have to laugh and say, oh my gosh, I get that all the time. Trust me, I think I'd know if my father were CIA. I think I'd know if my mother were CIA, which is, of course, not a lie.
Yes, you're not lying about it. You're just stating something. Yeah. Was there a sense that their having a big secret like that sort of gave you permission, I guess, to keep secrets of your own? Either from them or from other parts of your life. I guess the question is, how much of a cover story do you feel you construct about yourself?
Don't we all have cover stories about ourselves?
Oh yeah, kidding. For God's sake! Oh no, I'm totally down.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh no, I think consciously and subconsciously, I felt wholly justified in keeping whatever I wanted from them because of what I learned. And, they were very, my big line with my mother was, they say knowledge is power, but for my mother, information is power. And she pumped us for information about our lives in a way that, was her sort of making sure she could keep tabs on her children's private and, moral lives. And there just came a point where I realized that I could actually control the information I gave my mother and give her enough to make her think that she knew me and keep enough to myself to make sure I had some freedom.
In retrospect, do you think she actually knew everything all along, given the tradecraft she would have had for her career?
No. Okay. Yeah, that was something my brother also, informed about me. He said, they were still parents. They still had, rose-colored glasses when they looked at their children. Denial is a powerful thing. Even those in intelligence are susceptible to it. So no, I think I was pretty successful.
Okay. Because I'll say many years ago, my old magazine job, one of the women in the office, her graduating high school daughter, it was prom or something. And she called me and said she was at this person's house, but I could see from the caller ID, she was actually at this other person's house. And I busted her and I told her, like, Kathy, your daughter's really smart. She gave you that one. She wanted you to think you got her on something. So,
yeah, I agree with you there, Gail. Like, I'd give her, I'd volley up an easy one, be like, okay, Mom, you got me. You still got it.
Yeah. Now, when they looked everything over before you sent it on, before everything was vetted by the government, did your parents have things that they felt either you need to cut this already, or there's no way the feds are going to let this go in? Was there any feedback they gave you along the, the classified lines, as opposed to the family, the non-professional side of things?
No. Once I kind of gave them, I think what I actually ended up, the thing I initially showed them was a very early version of the book. And once I started writing what I now consider the real book, the passport that you have a copy of. Once that happened, I never showed them. Yeah, once I started working on that book, I did not show them anything else. And then, so I went into the review process with the publication review board at the agency. I went in, on my own. But I was very confident that it wasn't going to be a big problem. It was a requirement of my publication, my book contract. I thought it was going to be easy peasy. I thought I'd been very, very respectful. I'd, obscured all sorts of details. I'd been very nonspecific. I thought I'd been very circumspect, and it came back all blacked out. And that was confusing and painful. And
was there any negotiation possible, or was it simply?
Yes, there was some back and forth.
Okay.
And I kind of had to figure out a way to talk about certain things. And it's part of the game,
There's deep chronology. The things you might think are innocuous that would turn out to reveal something to someone else.
Right.
That are, yeah.
In the end, it forced me to be creative. There were things that I wish I could have talked about. There were certain things about this lifestyle that I had to step around. And I still mourn certain details because some of these details were the central facts of my life, and things that I would have never have hesitated to mention in a private conversation. So that was just shocking on some level emotionally. But in the end, we got creative, we got clever. I don't think it made the book less interesting. I think it actually probably made it stronger. So.
In that sense of being more universal? Or universally accessible, I guess, maybe a better way of putting it.
No, in the way that it forced us to focus on what actually mattered. What was this narrative about? What is actually superficial? And so in that sense, I think it became stronger.
How do you balance art, work, family, mid-pandemic? I mean, I recall you Instagramming a post of your pages and your late pregnancy belly, and just thinking, how is she getting to the drawing table? I don't even.
Right.
So, what was the process like after the writing and actually making this book in the middle of everything you've been going through?
I could tell you about 10 different versions of what living through 2020 was for me. And I only, and I hesitate to lean into the hard bits because overall I was beyond lucky. And I, as a family, we were really set up nicely to, everybody paid a cost, but the people who have truly paid for this pandemic, both with their lives and their livelihoods, we were lucky, very lucky. But yeah, I gave birth mere weeks before quarantine. I also was supposed to start, the final artwork for my, for the biggest project of my life, that year. And I had an infant, and we all got sick with a mysterious virus about 4 weeks into quarantine. And, I didn't get sick, but my husband did, and my infant son did. And, we got sick with what we now know was COVID. And everybody was working at home, and, it's really hard to separate out, you talk about as cartoonists, it was kind of a wash, right? And it's true. As a cartoonist, it was a wash. As a new mother, it was a wash. It really softened the blow of everything I lost because I had a newborn, and everything I lost because of COVID quarantine. Each thing kind of softened the blow of the other, right? And there were advantages. All of a sudden, the father of my child was home all day, and he could help. He could hold a baby while I pushed through and got through that day's deadline of 10 pages or however many pages I had to crush. But I'm also an extrovert. I missed people. I need people, giving up conventions has been.
You've heard me say it before. I'm still dreading going to a show without Tom Spurgeon around. But
Gail.
At the same time, and it's almost like it's divine justice that we haven't had a real show since since his death.
And you said that, I think, in one of your episodes, and I'd already thought of that. Thought of that. I'm like, it's almost fitting, because the first SPX without Tom will be just quite simply devastated. It's not right. It doesn't seem right. I think there's no way to, I know for you, the loss is intensely personal.
Yeah. But all of us.
But all of us, just the institutional knowledge that goes away with him, and I know this is really selfish. This is entirely selfish. But the last conversation I had with Tom, he was so sweet, and he said, your art's never been the problem. Your output is, because I'm a slow worker and I've been around forever, but I'm coming out with maybe a book a year, a mini a year. And that's when I'm on track. And I was so excited to show him this, what I mean? Because that's what he was to us. Like, look at this, Tom, I did it. His opinion, not his critical opinion, but his recognition of the average cartoonist at a table meant so much. And I selfishly was like, oh God, I'll never be able to say, look at it, I did it. I made a long book.
When we're off mic, I will tell you a story about one of your peers who, when Tom was around, had the same thing, but I'll fill you in on that later. So
I would love to hear that. And if that's too, I don't know.
No, this is all, his death coinciding just a few months before the pandemic hit, and how all of our lives have changed suddenly. Now we're all moving forward, and we have to figure out what was left behind and what's not going to be there, and what we can and can't get used to, I guess, and losing someone who mattered that much to us.
Yeah.
So how's your drawing evolved? How did you manage to live up to Tom's imprecation for more output?
Well, I'm not sure my drawing got better, but I can only account for output for this book. Sorry, Tom. I tried something different with Passport. I'd been sort of working on it for a couple of years, where my inks are not with ink. They were done in black colored pencil.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I love the texture, but I wonder if I'll keep doing it. I don't know,
Why not? I literally don't know. Like, I've just taken up drawing, so I have no idea what really.
And I can't wait to talk about that too. Gil, I'm loving watching your drawing develop. It's really cool. It's very cool.
I joke that if you start at the beginning last January, it looks like a guy with traumatic brain injury regaining the function of his fingers and brain and stuff. But anyway, tell me about the black colored pencil.
Oh,
what the issues are. Yeah.
I guess it doesn't. I guess I want, maybe going forward, I guess I'm greedy. I want both the depth and graphic clarity of ink back. Mm-hmm. But I love the soft texture of pencil, and I'm not sure how to do both. The big thing with Passport actually is that it was in color. I don't have a lot of color comics. All my other colored comics have been in watercolor. They've been like little paintings. This was not that. Yeah. So this was the first time that I did a long form piece with digital color. And that was that was really fun. I'm excited to do that again, actually. That's the thing I'm most excited to move on with.
The book credits somebody with doing the colors. What was the process like?
So Mike Freiheit, who's an amazing cartoonist, he helped me with my colors. I'm part of a little mini group called Cartoonist Family. We have a little Slack channel, and I don't know, I go to them perpetually for advice. They're incredibly supportive, lovely humans. and it helps sort of feed that, convention need that I have.
Yeah.
And Mike was like, I can give you advice. I've done this before. And after, it didn't take very long talking for me to realize, I was like, well, Mike, you're my person. Please help me. So I designed the palette, and said, can we do this? And I would provide him with the blue pencil line work. And what Mike brought to it was even more texture. He had, he brought in basically like brush texture, because it was really nice. It worked out very nicely, actually. It was because, and I'm glad, because ceding any control to another artist.
I was going to say, micromanaging control freaks that we are.
Oh, it was a lesson in like how much I actually am possessive and crazy. But he was wonderful and sensitive, and he definitely elevated it. So, and I was lucky because I'd run out of time. No offense to my infant son, who's now 1.5 years old, but he was not a planned child. He kind of showed up. And I was not expecting to have a baby while in the last crunch of finishing this book. But I did. So so finding somebody like Mike was really, really important because I was out of time.
Yeah. How long did the drawing portion, how long was the writing, and then how long was the drawing for you? Approximately. Yeah. Approximately.
It took me approximately 1 year to write and pencil. Although I sold the book on samples, so a big chunk was already done, about 70 pages. But then it took me another year to write and pencil it, and then finishes, so quote unquote inking, which was actually just black colored pencil. Not to diminish it, takes just as much time.
Yeah.
So
tracing.
So tracing, the tracing process, the tracing and coloring, that took another, I would say 10 months. Yeah. Yeah.
And besides those parts, were there process changes for you compared to your previous comics, or, did it pretty much approximate what you would do? It's just, this is a more advanced, again, having to work in color, working with this particular finishing style. Did you feel you were, making comics recognizably with the way you were making comics previously? This is just a different,
essentially,
scale.
Essentially, okay. Yeah. Nothing massively changed, which though there is a part of me that's like, maybe I feel like, is it time to move a little more digital? Because everything except for the coloring it's all still on paper for me.
I told Ed Sorrell yesterday, I sure love destruction. I just, he's like, you do everything by hand, right? I'm like, yep. I just love the fact that I cannot go back. I love destroying once I've done something. There's no, with the watercolors, you can, try and get some stuff out of there, but not with the sunflower I did today. It's a goddamn mess, and it's done. There's no fixing it from here. So
yeah, no, there is. Well, that's incredibly freeing. And I've watched artists, the problem with digital is, yes, not only you can save 8,000 different versions, you can try 8,000 different things, you can refine supposedly very easily. But the cost is, of course, time, isn't it? It's not actually, you don't save any time digitally. The digital advantages are something else, right?
Yeah. Well, you took Porcelino.
When it's paper, it's like, oh, well, I guess it's done. Let's go. But sorry, Porcelino.
And I was going to say, with Porcelino, he tells those stories of, he's doing everything by hand, but then once he scans things in and starts, quote unquote, cleaning up mistakes, the OCD can take over, and it's all of a sudden, it's going to be another year before the next King Cat, but it will come out. So
fascinating. That's interesting that he suffers from that. Or not suffers, but like
suffers is actually kind of appropriate.
Yeah,
but
maybe suffers is correct.
Now, do you plan on doing festivals again once it's if it's safe? And do you plan on doing the Kate LaCour thing of bringing small children to the festival? That's the follow-up question.
Yes, I do plan on going back to conventions. I'm assuming that once people start organizing them again, will mean it is safe again. I am, at this point, my family's been,
They want you to leave?
No, I'll be ready. But, for me, my personal risk assessment, et cetera, once we're sort of at a place where it's looking realistic, I'll be comfortable, I think, along with, other people. Yeah. Would I bring my children to a show? Yeah, I would. Absolutely.
It does raise the greater question of, would you want them following you into the family business like this?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about that. I do. I really do. But ultimately,
comics will break your heart, kid.
You must do it for loving the thing, not because it's a viable endeavor. Yeah. I mean, It is my career, but there is no guarantee that it would work out like this. And I've also done a lot of other things along the way. And so the question is, it's all about everything's trade-offs, right?
I do shudder to ask, given that we're just talking about this one coming out now, but, and you could say, I'm not going to talk about it, but do you have another project?
I do.
Okay.
My next book is writing itself now.
Convenient. Yeah.
No, yeah. I am working on my next book.
Cool.
And
we'll leave it at that. Don't say anything else about it, because that can,
I totally agree with you. I have talked projects to death. You can kill them. It's very weird.
So what did you learn from your parents versus what do they explicitly try to teach you, especially around the jobs they had and you mentioned in the book them teaching you the art of deflection in conversation, but I'm sure there are other aspects of things that they were either trying to instill in you or teach you versus things you kind of picked up on from observing them.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a virtue of the nature of their work.
Yeah.
But because this I'm sure would have been present in a number of careers. But I actually, but I don't think they could have done the kind of work they did without a profound sense of conviction, considering the sacrifices that you make to do this sort of thing. The other thing they, I guess, modeled, and I'm not sure if they ever fully, I don't remember being told this, but so you do the work, you wake up and you go, there were very few excuses for not getting it done. My father in particular had a aggressive work ethic, and I think that actually all of my siblings, it got to the point where I've considered that it might be genetic, internalized that profoundly. We're all workers, if that makes sense. We all put in the hours. But what did they teach me sort of?
I don't want to say tradecraft, but your mother's intelligence gathering, things like that. Like, were there aspects of that were just, that's how you talk to people. So you can learn,
Yeah. I mean, my dad would sometimes tell me, like, let's say I was keeping a secret, like, let's say I'm not going to tell you something. And then 5 minutes later, he would say, I know your secret. And I'd be like, how did you figure it out? And he's like, well, you have a tell, Sophia. When you're avoiding talking about something, you mention things around the thing. One that taught me explicitly in that moment how no longer to give my tell to my dad if I was hiding something from him. Yeah. But it taught me that, everybody has a tell. My father used to teach us poker as well. And now I'm a terrible poker player, but I might be better at reading people for those poker lessons, because he made us all incredibly aware that we are communicating constantly with each other without words. Yeah. Things like that, I mean, a little bit of it was just them modeling it. And a little bit of it was, yes, my dad would give me little tips and tricks. I mean, he taught me how to remember people's names, which has been really useful, which is just a really useful skill,
Oh, yeah. No, trust me. I if I don't write it down on a phone call within about 3 seconds, the name is gone almost instantly. So, yes.
Would you like my trick?
Yes, please.
I call it the alphabet game. Yeah. And you literally just run through the alphabet making a sound. And once you you can do it quietly in your own head, but once the sound will trigger the rest of the name. So if it's one of those things where it's on the tip of your tongue, by the time, if her name is, Jennifer, when you get to J, the J will basically
the rest of it. Yeah.
Fish the rest of it out. Things like that. I mean,
memorizing license plates.
No, but
I figure there were things that if they taught these things to you, you might start to question why they were teaching certain things to you. So, yeah.
I did have a habit of memorizing license plates as a kid, but that wasn't, nobody told me to do that. It was just paranoid delusion. I always thought, well, what if you need to know it? Yeah, and there's paranoia that goes along with that too. Like everybody's always looking, everybody's thinking. But the flip side of it, which was something my dad also taught me, was nobody's watching you. Everybody's just thinking about themselves. And there's a lot of freedom in that, I think, because I think that's actually a profound truth.
I've tried telling a friend of mine with depression that, because he failed to show up for my wedding, which was one of those things that pissed me off immensely. But then I realized he thought everyone was going to be looking at him because of the mental state he was in and not understanding. Nobody was going to be looking at him. But yeah, that's to universalize that is probably advisable given, how much we all think we're the center of the universe. But
yeah, I mean, that is, even when we think we're the worst thing at the center of the universe. I'm a worm, I'm slime, etc. And I'm also the most important being on the entire planet. It's a really weird thing that depression can do to you. Like that. But, It is. It's
not that I'm speaking from experience, but really.
Oh, no. Yeah. And that doesn't resound with me at all. I don't relate in the slightest there.
So the big question that I've had, and it goes to something long before I ever read Passport, just as a general question about the differences between men and women. How'd your parents meet?
They met at work.
I was wondering if it was related to that, and therefore, if you can't talk about it, but you know the story of how your parents met?
I do know the story. I'm not fully comfortable.
No. It's simply whether you know or not, because I believe women tend to know how their parents met and men tend not to.
That's funny.
Only because it came up once with a friend of mine in Spokane, Washington, who is half black and half Japanese. And that's those three things are a rare combination. I asked him, how'd your parents meet? I have no idea. And that led to I wonder, and we started, of course, asking, and 75% of women knew how their parents met, and about 10% of men knew how their parents met, in a small sample set, but enough to, as I decided, make it a grand universal law. So guys just don't care.
Yeah, I guess they might not have asked, in the first place to be told, or it just didn't go through. No, I do know my parents meet cute, if you will.
But it's classified, so don't worry. Which is also kind of awesome, though, when you get down to it. I could tell you, but then it would be a security risk. But does Passport, help you prep for explaining their grandparents to your kids? Or is it something that's, by then it's not even going to be an issue to say, talk about grandma and granddad?
I guess I'm such a selfish parent. I hadn't thought about it in those terms yet. But I'm probably going to hide the book from my kid for a little bit longer. It's got a lot of sort of bad teenage behavior.
Yeah, more adolescent read than a toddler.
No, but will it help me explain them to them?
Will it explain you more than it'll explain your parents, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it, because ultimately, we were just talking about how we're all self-obsessed, it really is just about me
Yeah.
and the way my parents affected me. But no, I mean, it'll be a pretty useful shorthand. No, yes, I guess ultimately, yes, because I was forced to, by nature of writing a memoir, refine some of my thinking around the way I felt about my parents. And that certainly will help telling the stories of them to my kids.
And I guess my last major question, before you get to ask me anything you've always wanted to ask, are you a fan of The Americans?
Oh, right. So this comes up a lot.
I assumed, but, I haven't asked you yet.
Because, obviously it sort of relates. I started it. And, Matthew Rhys is amazing. He's great. I could just watch him all day. But I got really frustrated. I was like, this is unrealistic. That's not how this thing works, which is it's a pretty common response I have to a lot of, spy stuff. I'm like, that's not what the CIA looks like. That's not, accurate. That's not, that's silly. Right.
Yeah. And
I kind of had a similar reaction to The Americans, and I kind of got frustrated early on. And I told my dad, I was like, ugh, don't watch The Americans. It's so unrealistic. These Russian spies were so embedded and they never speak Russian to each other. Yeah, right. And my father turned to me and he said, no, Sophia, they were the best. You would never know. What they did was, beyond what any other country was capable of. Mm-hmm. So I think I got to give it another go.
And just get to stare at Matthew Rhys and Kerry Russell. But
and they're
Matthew Rhys.
They're beautiful. They're beautiful. Oh, yeah. So I know I need to watch more of The Americans. But
when you get to the very end, you can decide whether it lives up to my line of it's the one show in that whole prestige TV world that actually stuck the landing for the finale.
Oh, really?
But yeah, it'll be a long time from now when you finally see it. But of all shows, it might be the one that has a finale that's satisfying as storytelling, not just fan service. Yeah, it nails everything. And well, anyway, you'll be able to come back and tell me at the next festival we're at. But
I will.
Yeah. Meanwhile, what do you want to ask me? Especially about the drawing stuff, I guess, even though I'm a complete noob with this. But
honestly, it's really, really satisfying to watch these drawings because you're obviously a sensitive observer, and the thrill of watching the learning curve, just like woo, it's like a little roller coaster, right? And yeah, I'm really impressed. I'm impressed also by what it takes to do it, because really it's a lot of work, especially at the beginning. If when you see drastic improvement quickly, that can be very satisfied. And I guess I'm curious for you, like, what's it been like? How many hours are you putting into it? How frustrated are you versus how satisfying is it?
It's been weird. It's only 10 months just about since I picked up a pencil for the first time. And like I said, it literally looks like a guy with traumatic brain injury at the beginning. There's just jagged lines on a paper of these 3 trees in my backyard. But even there, like the first couple of weeks, I look at them, I'm like, oh, I figured out all this stuff in a pretty short period of time by just standing and looking at things. Then As I've as I've unfortunately put it, all I was doing was drawing trees for a while, and then the goddamn leaves came in, and that really caused a problem because I had to learn color or figure out how to do color and everything else, and then watercolors, and then drawing things from screen instead of real life. And then the big problem was Kate LaCour sent me a pocket brush, and that just, once I started using that, I'm like, oh god damn it. Now I have to figure out, A, how to handle the line, B, what's appropriate, not appropriate for this tool. But it's been fascinating for me just learning to look, especially when I was doing the live drawings for the first few months, just looking at trees and trying to draw what I saw. And it's it makes me envious of you guys, all my cartoonist and artist pals, working at this stuff throughout the real formative years when you have time to do something like this. And my artist pals all say the same thing you do, which is we're envious that, we're watching someone go through it now as a, we'll say middle-aged or adult person. I keep thinking of trying to figure out how to do comics. Basically, I just have a 4-panel strip I wanted to do for my zine that I've figure out, well, as soon as I understand how I can draw a fortune teller, a crystal ball, and a customer who looks like me, well, it doesn't have to look too much like me. I'll be able to pull this off, and then I can just stop drawing, for the rest of time because I'll have figured out how to do this one gag strip that's going to encapsulate my life. It's not really that simplistic, but yeah, it's been like rereading The Lettuce Girl. I just found myself looking at your landscapes, looking at your trees and, how you rendered the woods and all that, thinking, yeah, I should be doing this a lot more simply than.
Oh, yeah. No, that's the trick. First of all, trees are...
Daryl Cunningham's line was, "You don't have to draw all the leaves, Gil. It's okay."
You don't have to draw all the leaves. This is true. It's massing, right? It's like hair. It's hair and tree leaves, same problem, right? The initial impulse is actually to go in strand by strand, which is one, you don't have the time. Two, even if you could, it would look weird. It doesn't, because the trick of all, one of the biggest drawing tricks I ever learned was when to lose the line. Mm-hmm. And that's the joy of comics as well as drawing, is your reader, your viewer does a lot of filling in. They do a lot of the work for you. But trees are really hard. And I know, when I used to teach, I'd have students who were art majors who were refusing to draw trees because they were too hard. So the fact that you went for trees first is really good for your brain, your drawing brain, I think.
If you saw where I lived, you'd understand. It's the only thing I see. I look
also,
out the window.
They stand still, which is very, very useful. But so yes, let go of the idea of all the leaves, obviously. But yeah, it's very, very cool and it's especially in terms of, I love drawing trees as well, but my trees, gosh, I'm still working on them. You know what I mean? I feel almost once a year, I learn something new about a tree. And you're probably learning more than I am, because what I really miss about my traditional arts background is the meditative quality of drawing from life, which so much of my drawing is drawing from reference right now, or just from my own brain.
You experience that too? Because drawing trees outside, I would get that. Drawing on screen or from a printout or something, the voices are back in your head.
Right.
That's okay. So I'm glad I'm not the only one who's schizophrenic. No. I'm not the only one who has issues with.
Actually, yeah. No. And 4 panels. That's exactly. I'm very excited for you. That's exactly.
Trust me. If Bob Sikoriak had time and could have drawn it for me, I probably wouldn't have taken up drawing. But stupidly, he's got a project going on. I just let me just start drawing. Maybe I'll figure out how to do that strip finally. And it all escalated into this. It escalated into yesterday having Ed Sorrell flipping through one of my sketch pads, saying, "Oh, hey, this is really good," which. From there on, there are little clouds under my feet right now. I'm still just walking around on the, holy shit, Ed Sorrell unsolicited, just, hey, I like that. That's a nice one.
Yeah,
So,
no, you should be. Yeah. I'm very excited watching your stuff. Like, it's very cool. And also, like, and I hope this doesn't sound condescending, but I think I'm allowed to say it because I used to teach drawing, which was really harder for me than I thought, because it turns out everything I think I know about drawing is trapped in my head in weird ways that I found very hard to externalize.
Yeah.
But you're at the stage where, like, hours in is results out. You know what I mean? You are still, your plateau is ahead of you. So it's just like, it's lovely. And those, like, there's the boxer,
the pugilist at rest, or the boxer at rest. Yeah.
The boxer at rest, which is like literally one of my favorite pieces of art. It's
good Lord. Yeah.
The pathos. The way that you chose to draw it gave me a new way of seeing it. And that's so cool. So I'm so thrilled you're drawing, and keep posting everything.
My real reason for drawing, I mean, I love the sculpture, but my real reason for it was because he doesn't have eyes. I wasn't going to have to draw the pupils and everything, which they look terrible whenever I do them. And I thought, well, he's just got two big black gaps for eyes. That'll make this easier. And that led me down a big rabbit hole. So.
As you can see, I mean, you're talking to somebody who draws dots for eyes. So yeah.
I understood Harold Gray in that instant. I was like, oh, that's why he does that. Okay. So yeah, well, it was a funny thing yesterday. One of the ones that Sorrell liked was a pencil sketch I did of Celia Paul, the portrait artist. And it's one that I particularly despise. And he's like, oh no, this one's really good. And I said, the proportions of this, that, and the other, it's all bad. He said, no, it's good, Gail. And he said, I forget who he was quoting, but the definition of a portrait is a drawing of a face in which the mouth is wrong. Huh. And I thought, well, yeah, okay. if everybody else feels the same way, I feel good then, because to me the little thumb on her shoulder is pretty much the best part of it. But he's like, no, you capture a lot of neat stuff with this. So yeah, it's there's that and the phenomenon, and I hope you still experience it, where the drawing gets better overnight somehow. You might be unhappy with something, you come back, hey, it's actually better than I thought it was. Maybe that's still my not quite plateauing.
Overnight, like in a year, I might. Okay. Yeah, seriously, it takes
the elves a while to go and fix it for you. Okay.
It really does. Like, when I look back at the Lettuce Girl, I'm like, oh, hey, this was kind of.
Yeah. Do you have that feeling?
Clever. How did I do that? Yeah. Like I'll forget how I did it. I'll forget all sorts of little decisions, and I'll be like, oh, that's fun. Right now, when I look at Passport, I can't look at it still. I still can't look at it properly. Yeah. It's too close.
I get you. But there's a lot of other people who are going to read it. And you've got a heck of a lot of press for this, besides, being on the podcast with some schlub from New Jersey. Was it weird for you getting this much press attention?
This has been, of course, not what I'm used to.
Standing at a small table at Mocha, but yeah.
Yeah. The book has a hook. I've been very lucky in that it can be distilled into something quick that sounds exciting. And it helps that it's a true story. And I think that has a lot to do with it. But I have a very talented set of people around it. My agent is amazing. My editor is remarkable. And I've had a very positive experience with quote unquote traditional publishing for this book.
Awesome. I'm always not amazed. I'm always gratified when, artists I've known, especially people who I've seen in, minis or zines and things like that, we'll say graduate into something like this, where you have this sort of book and this sort of attention besides, again, sitting down with me. So,
yeah, no, I mean,
but I'm so glad you made time for me.
Oh yeah, no, seriously, Gail, I've wanted to do this for so long because honestly, I just love talking to you. And I wanted to do it now more than ever because we don't have our little chance at SPX.
We will be together again at some goddamn festival or another. SPX, TCAF,
something or another. Yeah.
Mocha, meh, but yeah.
Oh, Mocha. Yeah. Oh, it's been a while. A while. That used to be that was my be all end all, but then SPX eclipsed it as a sort of the emotional center of my comics life.
Yeah. Are you able to keep up with comics well enough, beyond all the family and working on your own book and everything, not going to festivals? Because I missed like 2 or 3 Love and Rockets and other things. I'm like, yeah, they were still publishing that. I managed to miss those. So
that's been an adjustment because I used to save up all my sort of comic buying for, either you want to support the artist directly by buying from, their small press publisher or them directly at their table, or you want a signature, or that's just where you see all the books and maybe Fantagraphics is having a deal, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So I've had to adjust to buying comics online, which is not as fun. But I'm always behind on comics. That's honestly, I know I'm not the only cartoonist who is like this. I will go a very long time without reading a comic. Yeah. And then I'll just kind of like stock up. But if I, I'm not as well read often as I wish I was. Because I'm too busy making them.
That's the best reason not to keep up. Don't worry about it. I make excuses like, no, I've got the podcast. But really, yeah, I should be reading more than I currently do. But, now I've got the Tamakis I at least have to make on my next wish list. So.
Oh, gosh. They're just the best. The best.
Yeah. And maybe there'll be future podcast guests too. But meanwhile.
That would be very cool.
I'm so glad we got to do this. I'm bummed we didn't get to do this in person, but let's figure out next time we're going to be in the same festival or at least city that we
festival circuit, same tri-state area. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, this has been like a huge pleasure. I love listening to these conversations. So.
And now you're one of my victims. I mean, one of my wonderful guests.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much for coming on. And, again, congratulations with Passport. It's a joy, and I am not the intended audience for it, and I enjoyed the living hell out of it. So
I'm so glad. Thank you so much, Gail. I really appreciate that.
And that was Sophia Glock. Like I said at the end, Passport is YA, but it's a really good book on its own. I mean, for me, not being a YA reader, I loved it. So go check it out. It's available in your favorite bookstore now, and it's published by Little Brown Young Readers. You can check out more of Sophia's work at her site, sophiadraws.com, which is SOPHIADRAWS.com. She's also on Twitter as Sophia Drawing and Instagram as Sophia Draws Daily. So follow her all those ways. She posts neat stuff. There's great art. There's great stuff about the kids. She does great Instagram stories. And go read Passport. I plan on having Sophia on again after she's finished watching The Americans. So we'll see how that goes. Now you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this guy putting out conversations every week with writers, artists, creative types, musicians, translators, publishers, all sorts of people. I always appreciate discovering new listeners. And in fact, somebody wrote me from Portugal a couple of days ago to get a copy of my zine and to let me know how much he's enjoying the show. And that's always kind of rewarding. You can also let me know what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie, TV show, book, music, comic, theater, piece of art, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email or by postcard, letter, or even leaving me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you do not have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long, and if it's something you want me to share with in a future episode of the show,
let me know that too. Now, if you have money to spare, don't give it to me. My day job treats me just fine. Even with all the crazy frenetic activity I'm engaged in, it all pays well and it's all worth it. What I would love is for you to support institutions and individuals in need. For individuals, you can look through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding sources like that. For institutions or foundations, you could look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, election registration funds. There are all sorts of things you can do to help build a better world, so I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.